Well, the leaders of Southeast Asian nations were in Sydney during the weekend for a special ASEAN Summit. There was a lot that they agreed on, with Australia, of course, hosting this meeting. Agreements around sharing information and intelligence towards countering terrorism. Agreements around trade and infrastructure as well. But the big question hanging over this, as always, is China. The spectre of China, the South China Sea and China's growing influence throughout the region. Huong Le Thu is a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute and she joins me now. Nice to have you with us. I want to go to the question of China in just a moment, but first can I get your overview about how successful do you think that this meeting was?
I thought it was very successful. I thought it was interesting in a way that it wasn't just a summit where leaders meet, but it was actually over a week of activities around the summit, where Australia really put a lot of effort to engage civil society, young people, students, and a business community. So it was very interesting in a way that it could foster quite concrete cooperation and a really bridge between societies in Southeast Asia and Australia.
And of course Australia has a long relationship with ASEAN. I think it was the first dialogue partner 50 years ago. And now we've seen renewed calls for Australia to become a member of ASEAN. There's some sensitivity around that and of course Australia not eagerly embracing it. But what do you think about that idea and what Australia could bring to ASEAN?
Yes, that is interesting. Australia's first dialogue partner, but it took only until now to host the first summit. So that was very interesting for me to observe. On the question of membership, though, I think it is important that Australia answer first why it wants to join ASEAN in the first place, because it is an organization that can change, and we've seen that when Vietnam joined in 1995, and then later Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, which changed the organization entirely, right?
But Australia, if it did, would really be a significant change, wouldn't it? And it would also impede a little, wouldn't it, on Australia's, its own foreign policy and its own unilateralism in the region too, wouldn't it?
It would change entirely everything, Stan. I think it would change also Australians' identity, right? Can it identify as a Southeast Asian nation? So before, I think there would be avenue to debate about the membership, but the first question is still not answered. Why would Australia want a membership? It has all avenues now, and now they've created a range of new avenues to engage with Southeast Asia on different levels, from business to counter-terrorism to more concrete cooperation like maritime security or even urban planning. So there are a lot of things that Australia can do without being within the structure of ASEAN.
And one of the things it's done, and this was, I suppose, the big presence in the room, even though they weren't there, and that is China. What to do about China's growing reach and influence. And it struck this deal now, this ASEAN-Australia Infrastructure Cooperative, which I suppose it's being seen as an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative from China. China's increasing economic reach. How successful do you think that will be in countering China's influence?
It will be quite challenging. However, there is quite an appetite in the region to hear about this kind of initiative. And Australia, next to Japan and India and perhaps also US on board, have been argued an alternative to the Chinese initiative, including Belt and Road Initiative, which would be a proposal of sustainable, of high quality and transparent arrangements in terms of infrastructure investment in Southeast Asia. And Southeast Asia, as you have pointed out, it's very interested in most of the infrastructure projects.
But of course this isn't about infrastructure alone, is it? This is about geopolitics.
It is about geopolitics, but it's also about economics itself. There's a lot of economics in there as well. And I think one of the initiatives that have been announced after this summit, the 30 million budget to smart cities exchange, is a part of it too. So yes, we are interested in geopolitics and geoeconomics, but on the ground, businesses and citizens are very interested in sustainable and ecological and smart cities planning.
And still there is the question of the South China Sea. ASEAN has grappled with this. It's been moving towards a code of conduct. But the big question is, to what extent can it influence China? To what extent is China going to listen to that or to take into account the sensitivities of the region when it comes to what it sees as its own territorial objectives? Looking at this meeting and considering the Code of Conduct and the potential for a flashpoint, a conflict in the South China Sea, how successful was it handled this time?
Well, I think this time South China Sea is not a new issue, and every declaration, every summit has some annotation, whether more directly or less. This time I think it was interesting that the issue of non-militarization was raised, which is quite a welcome initiative, rather than just saying abiding by international law or UNCLOS for that matter. So it does point out the militarization issue, which is a bit main concern for the region and really the source of tension. How successful? It's a question, it's an open question that the whole region has been asking every meeting, and you know that ASEAN leaders meet over 1,000 times a year. So the debate on Code of Conduct has been lasting for 25 years. We still haven't got it. We are close to a framework for a Code of Conduct. But among really many issues is whether a code of conduct would be legally binding or not. Because if we can have the most beautifully crafted code of conduct, but it's not legally binding, then it wouldn't do much change.
And of course there was the issue of human rights, and that really hung very heavily over this as well, and the question of Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. But we'll have to save that conversation for another time. Aung San Suu Kyi here in Australia at the moment as well. Good to talk to you, Huong. Thank you so much.
Good to talk to you.